and welcome to Season 5 of Teaching Matters, a podcast from the Psych Sessions Network. I'm Eric Landrum from Boise State University, one of Teaching Matters' 3 co-hosts. My other 2 co-hosts are Susan Nolan from Seton Hall University and Adeyinka Akinseler-Smith from City College of New York. And we do say goodbye to another co-founder of this podcast, Asani Sewell, in episode 6 of this Season 5. These 10 episodes of Season 5 were recorded from July 2022 through March of 2023 and are released on 10 consecutive Saturdays in 2023, starting on March 18th and continuing through May 20th. Oh, the places we'll go. We'll open with a current discussion of AI and ChatGPT. Then we'll harken back to mid-2022, where we had multiple conversations with different members of the Society for Teaching of Psychology, that's STP, and different task force leaders about their work. We'll chat about career transitions and changes, one time generically and one time specifically, as podcast co-founder Asani Sewell joins us, sadly, for the last time, as a regular, and discusses her departure from the podcast. In the remaining episodes, we discuss other classic topics that are, yes, beyond teaching. How do we handle students and other professionals and how they address us? We talk about the rituals of higher education and how they relate to our regular daily lives, with special meaning for Eric. A discussion about the special skill of peer reviewing, and then a discussion about applying for honors and awards. Why it's good for you, your department, and why you should apply as a role model, even if you think you might not receive the award. It's all part of the knowledge and skills that psychology professionals need to know about, the stuff that we are not taught in graduate school. That is, beyond teaching. Welcome to Season 5. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Teaching. We are thrilled to have guests, and 2 out of the 3 regulars on this podcast will be on their best behavior. You can guess the 2. My name is Eric Landrum. I'm from Boise State University. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves.
And I'm Yinka Akinseler-Smith from the City College of New York, City University of New York.
And I'm Susan Nolan from Seton Hall University. And we're really excited to have 2 guests with us today. And I will let our guests introduce themselves and I'll fill you in on why they're here. Who wants to go first, Chris or Jenel?
I can go first. I'm Jenel Cavazos. I'm from the University of Oklahoma, assistant professor in psychology, and also the introductory psychology coordinator.
Yeah, I'm Chris Hakala. I am the director for the Center for Excellence in Teaching, Learning, and Scholarship and professor of psychology at Springfield College in Springfield, Massachusetts.
We're really excited to have you both here today. And for our audience, we invited Jenel and Chris because during my STP presidential year, I had a few task forces, and one of them was on pivot teaching, with the idea of pivoting during a pandemic, your entire class, but also pivoting in smaller ways too for individual students, et cetera. And Jenel was the chair of that task force, and Chris was among its most active members. And so maybe we can start by having you talk a little bit about your task force and some of the things you're accomplished. And I'd also like to segue later into just some nuts and bolts about what it's like to be on STP's task. We have presidential task forces every year. So maybe talk about that sort of more broadly secondly. So Jenel, since you are the chair, would you like to start?
Sure. So the idea behind the Pivot Teaching Task Force is that we learned a lot, obviously, during the pandemic about what kind of chaos can be created when we have to move from one modality to another modality mid-semester. And obviously there were a lot of social, societal things going on at the same time. But the idea was, can we bring together some resources to help faculty members, to help instructors be able to sort of anticipate these kinds of changes that might occur, whether it's hopefully not another global pandemic, but even small things that might happen, floods, or I'm in Oklahoma, tornadoes, or illnesses, or just anything that could happen that could result in a pivot into a different modality, either long term, like a whole semester, like we had to do for the pandemic, or short term, even an individual student for a week or two. So the idea was that if we can sort of provide resources to help instructors anticipate those things and design a course that is pivot ready in advance of ever needing to pivot, it would help the flexibility, help the equity involved in making sure we capture and can contact each student. All those kinds of things are just benefited if we can plan in advance. So we tried to gather up a whole bunch of resources. We really just started by brainstorming as a committee what kinds of things are important to understand, what areas are the most heavily impacted, and kind of divided up amongst people who wanted to work on sort of different areas of this issue. And then we brought together a whole bunch of resources about everything from the struggles with keeping contact with students when you're in a million different places, things like assignment creation, things like assessment, faculty kind of health and wellness, a lot of different things from a whole bunch of different areas. And this has culminated in, I think, two major things. One was that we did a virtual presentation at APA last year, and the second is a publication that is in the very, very, very final stages of getting out there to the public. So hopefully everybody will be able to read our work very, very soon, I hope. Yeah.
Yeah, I just like to add, and Janelle summarized it really well. What we tried to do too, what Janelle tried to do and Susan, was bring together people who had very different backgrounds and perspectives on the task force,
Definitely.
who came from different types of institutions, who could view this issue from a variety of different perspectives. And I think that what has been really interesting about the whole process is considering that most institutions have had to do these small pivots at various times. And for most of the time, those pivots have been very temporary and people have immediately gone back to the way things were before. After this one, I think the idea really was, as Janelle pointed out, a time where we really need to think about the idea that this might happen again and really be intentional about the way we design our educational experiences. And it is interesting. Janelle mentioned a tornado, but what in our area, we're in Massachusetts, and we did have a tornado 11 years ago that shut down all of our schools, and we did that very quick pivot, and then we returned back to normal very quickly after that. And I think that by really being intentional about the way we design courses and the flexibility that we afford our faculty and our students, it just leads to a better educational experience. But it's also harder, and that has led to lots of issues, and we can talk about that. But as a center director, I can tell you there's some pushback on this. So
One of I want to hear about the pushback, but one of the things that I really enjoyed about the diverse members that we had in this committee were those experiences. So without revealing too much information, one of the critiques on our publication, one of the reviewer with 2 or 3 comments, was that it's not really relevant anymore. It's the pandemic's kind of over. Everything has settled. And maybe this would have been cutting edge in spring of 2020, but now nobody cares. And I was able to sort of rebut that comment by giving out some of these stories and saying, like, yeah, but it's not just a pandemic. Like, the point was, and one of the things that we realized by talking to the members of this committee was that this happens all the time. Chris, you're talking about your experience. We had a member whose university shut down. The university closed down. It was out of money and they had to leave. Or the building gets shut down and they have to move virtual. Or the faculty member gets pregnant, or, I mean, there's so many things that can cause this to happen that I would encourage people to not think of this as, oh, well, it's just the pandemic and now it's over. Not at all. And that's what I loved that about this committee, that it wasn't time locked in any way. This is something that we're going to be talking about for a very long time.
I had to pivot this spring. I was in Costa Rica for a conference and I got COVID and I got quarantined, but I was well enough to teach. So suddenly my online courses were online for a week or so. So yeah, I think this, and I'm hopeful we're never going to have another pandemic, but
sure.
the epidemiologists are telling us it's likely. So
Sure.
Yeah. I
There's
saw
so
Yinka's face when
no,
you
go ahead.
said that the reviewer was pushing back. Do you want to respond with your thoughts, Yinka?
Well, it's just like, have they seen the new figures that are coming out? Have they heard about the variants? And of course, all other events that kind of go along. That just bothered my brain when I heard you say that, frankly.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
felt about the same.
there's so much to unpack here. First off, there's the coolness of an STP president recognizing the moment and capitalizing on taking a task force opportunity and really generating a group of people who can put something forward that can be helpful in perpetuity. That's really cool. There's also the importance of assembling a diverse group of people from not only diverse ethnic backgrounds, but parts of the world and different educational diversity in terms of the institutions they come from, which is oftentimes very challenging. There's that aspect of it. We have colleagues who had never taught online in their entire career, whether it's been 2 years,
That's me,
20
Susan.
years, right?
I'm right
Yinka,
there
raise
with
your
you,
hand.
Susan.
And some of them discovered I can do it. Some of them discovered I can do it and I like it. And some of them discovered I never want to do it again. And I think all three outcomes are insightful for every single person and departmental leader. The one I think Chris kind of foreshadowed accidentally an issue that we've discovered at Boise State, which is now that we've all shown we can pivot when we have to, and when we do the grand pivot together as an institution, we can all do that. Here's what we experienced over and over following that: students asking for individual pivots.
Huh?
So, adjunct instructor with 80 students getting paid $3,300. I'm sorry, that's embarrassing. It is what it is. Has 80 students face to face. A student having a legitimate concern about doesn't want to return to class, is having COVID-like symptoms, is getting advice not to return, go to their adjunct instructor and says, I would like you to start teaching this class to me online tomorrow. I don't know when I'm going to be able to return to class. That instructor has not prepared nor was paid to teach it online when they were hired 6 months ago, right? Because we do hiring and scheduling so far in advance.
Okay.
And that's the issue that we're grappling with. How do you accommodate students who may have legitimate accommodations and expectations? Because we showed
Right.
we could do a grand pivot over a weekend.
Mhm.
Yet faculty members who may be unprepared or underprepared, and certainly for adjuncts, underpaid. I'll stop and let you all solve that world problem for me.
So this is a big deal. So in the teaching center world, this is a big question. And one of the things that we have found, at least at my institution, is that the least desirable modality is the Zoom students in while you have live students sitting in the class. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Cognitive load of the instructor is one of the most challenging reasons, but there's lots of reasons for it. And so what we tried to do at our institution and what I've recommended to other faculty is to create some of those, as you alluded to, Eric, some of those pivot ready courses by having a, a, a collection of ideas of strategies that you as an instructor have to help accommodate in ways that make sense students when these things come up, knowing that they're going to come up. And there's a variety of ways to do it at a smaller institution like I'm at, and larger institutions have other challenges. But I think if you set up the class ahead of time with some of these ideas in place, then when it does happen, you can do that. Now, Eric, you said $3,300 for an adjunct. That's what we pay our really experienced adjuncts. Our unexperienced, our underexperienced adjuncts get $2,700, and so it's not enough money. And so full-time faculty have the responsibility of working with the chairs to provide some options. And it's a lot of work, and it is asking a lot until we really come up with good strategies. I mean, lecture capture is one of the easiest ways to do it, but at a small institution like ours, we don't have lecture capture. It's too expensive. And so there's lots of challenges out there. But I think the important thing is at least we're asking the question now and we're trying to work within the constraints that we have at any institution to try to develop strategies that are going to best serve our students. And that's really what we've done. And there's been some hits and some misses. I mean, one of the things that we're able to do is we have a fairly healthy budget in our academic success center. So we were able to put note takers in every classroom. So if a student misses class, they can at least get notes from a note taker for every class. And so that's been
Wow.
helpful for our students. We're small enough classes that faculty do have the ability to meet with some students who miss, but it's a continuing challenge. And like I said, the best part of it is at least we're continue to talk about it and continue to try to develop strategies.
Janelle, you mentioned that your task force it sounds like you've got a publication in the works that's going to come out. But did your task force also assemble like resources and like a compendium or something that might be available now to people who are interested, or will that be kind of like an appendix in this what's to come?
It is sort of an appendix. So
Gotcha.
we've already gone through 2 revisions. We're just like dotting the I's, crossing the T's kind of on this last revision that was very much just change some punctuation and things like that. And then that goes back out and hopefully will be available. And in that publication, there are some suggestions of specific assignments, things like that, that are pivotable easily, and just sort of the collective wisdom of the group with some publications that had come out sort of post-pandemic already looking at some of the impacts. Those are all kind of consolidated in one place. So I wouldn't say thing that is like revolutionary compared to what is already available. It's just that it's all consolidated in a way that's much easier and more accessible for somebody who is, for example, an adjunct who isn't going to spend hours and hours and hours reading every bit of literature out there to figure out how to do their job better when they're being paid next to nothing. Reading 1 or 2 summary, concise articles on the topic that points you in the right direction for some of these things, I think is much more accessible and much more realistic for a lot of people.
Yeah, don't undervalue that service that journal article provides, and that you've vetted all those resources.
Okay.
You've gone and read everything. You and your committee have read everything in that appendix. And so it's good stuff. And so when that adjunct or me goes and reads that article, I'm reading something that has been written by my peers and peer reviewed by my peers as well. That's really valuable.
Thank
I
you.
just want to add too that coming from an STP task force gives it an additional way to get more attention to it. So the STP newsletter, distribute through social media, including Twitter, but also the Facebook page, which we've got, I want to say 4,000 paying members, but we've got about 16,000 members on our Facebook page, and a lot from other countries in the world. So anyone can sort of broadcast their stuff through it, but it's sort of when it's coming from a task force, it has an added weight. So I hope we'll get a lot of attention within the STP world.
And even if the article comes out after this podcast goes live, we can attach it to this podcast. And so anyone who goes and grabs this podcast will have the option, if you allow it, to download a PDF version.
That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just hope it helps people.
I'm sure it will. I had some conversations with Jenel and Chris along the way, and there's a lot of so I've had a little bit of a sneak preview. I'm really excited to see it. I wanted to segue a little bit because we're beyond teaching, so not just talking about teaching, but some of the other things that academics do. And I wondered if you might just talk about the experience of, again, there are usually 3 task forces a year, sometimes more. Linda Wolf is our current president, has more. And I should just quick plug, Diane Finley is our president for 2023. And so she'll have task forces as well to look out for. I think it's a great way for people to start getting involved in STP. But if you want to talk a little bit about your experience on it, pros, cons, things that if someone is coming into a task force and has joined it that they might want to know, just anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we've talked about this before, but the biggest pro of having so many unique, diverse people is kind of also the biggest con. It was trying to figure out how to take all of our very, very different experiences and make them work together when normally people from such different educational backgrounds kind of wouldn't be working on the same project at the same time. And like I said, that's an amazing thing, but it was really tricky to figure out how to go about even tackling something. I mean, of course, as broad as pivot teaching as a whole, but many of the members of the committee were from much smaller teaching schools. Many were from counseling therapy backgrounds where they are very used to meeting one-on-one in a class of 6, and their pivot to Zoom was very different than, for example, mine, where I teach 500 freshmen in a room. And so the various experiences were just really sort of tricky to pull together. And then also it's just attrition. I mean, we had so much difficulty just getting people at the beginning who were very fired up, very interested, very much, we're going to do this. It's going to be the best thing in the world. And then a couple months in, we're like, I have things and life and commitments. And everybody does. I mean, that is just the way of the world. But trying to do this during a major pandemic year. Are we going to have major and minor pandemic years now? I'm not sure how that works. Like, we still have a pandemic, but it was more of a pandemic then. So, a lot of people, I think, bit off more than they could chew, both with workloads and sort of mental loads. And so we lost a lot of people. And then it was a matter of sort of having to constantly pivot the pivot committee with
Very
with
meta.
with having to change the plan, having to change the deliverables, having to change the assembly of the people and their roles within it. So flexibility really was key with that as well. So I think people going into it, the chair position is different. We're trying to pull everybody together, but sort of as much as you can, anticipating a workload and trying to stick to it, because it's when you're on a committee with other people, it's up to the whole committee as a whole. If somebody decides, well, I'm not going to do this, then other people have to sort of fill in and figure out. So I think as with every commitment, it's especially important to really think through, can I make this commitment before signing up to do this, or before saying, yes, I can cover these aspects of it. And with the understanding that, of course, life happens. I mean, we can't anticipate everything. But I think that just really taking the time to sit and think through, can I do this, is one of the biggest things that would help committees going forward.
I also think
Yeah.
one thing you're saying, Jenel, too, and this committee's work is still going on because you're still trying to get it out there. I think that's actually true for a lot of presidential task forces, because you do your work over the year, but then you're still working on getting a deliverable out there. I've been on a couple of presidential task forces over the years, and they don't end right away. So I think it's being willing to commit, but also being realistic that it's not going to necessarily end on December 31st of your task force year.
Yeah.
I also just want to commend Jenel on your leadership, because with everything that you're talking about coming out with this almost published manuscript, it's really impressive.
Thank you.
I think, Chris, you were going to jump in.
That's okay. I was going to say, I apologize, Susan. I think what Jenel said is actually, I first off, I concur exactly 100% with what you said with Janelle's leadership. She was really great at trying to move us along. And it was a really interesting group, as Jenel pointed out. And Susan, you did appoint, as the president, a large group, which was really helpful to start because it got a lot of ideas going. But there also, of course, was, as Jenel pointed out, the attrition due to all sorts of variables. And I think that one of the interesting things about task forces, presidential task forces, or actually, forget anything academic, is that we ask our students to be flexible thinkers and to understand that we have goals in mind. And I think it's something that our faculty colleagues really need to respond to sometimes as well, because it is, there are life issues that come up. And I think that as we move through the task force, I think there were people who really did, as Jenel said, believe they bit off more than they could chew. And we're gracious about stepping out. And I think that that's something that faculty need to be aware of. If you sign on to something and you recognize, listen, I thought I could do this, I really can't right now, and I'm sorry. I think I just need to step aside. I appreciate the opportunity and to do that. And that's actually much more appreciated than people who simply disappear. And so I think that that's something that as professionals, it's really important for us to do, to recognize when we've reached our limits and be aware and okay and accept that. And it's interesting because I work on a number of these professional organizations through the teaching world now, the teaching center world. And there are a couple of organizations that make a lot of work happen through volunteer labor. And what happens with that is like what you did with this, Susan, is you gather a lot of people knowing you're going to have attrition. And I think that that's the way these volunteer organization commitments work. But Jenel did a really nice job of keeping us in the loop, of informing us, of keeping the train moving. And the idea that we have this paper that is this close to being published is fantastic. And if you had asked me in July of the year of the task force, I might have said, that's great. I will be really impressed if we get there, because we had hit some roadblocks, but Jenel really pulled us through masterfully. She did a great job.
In full disclosure, the large committee was because I wanted to be inclusive. So I had a deadline for my 3 task forces, and everyone who signed up at that deadline, I put them on the committee. We could debate about whether or not I should do that when I'm president again. Joking, of course. It's one. I mean, I learned from
It's
it.
one and done. You can't be president again.
Yeah, I mean, should I have made it more roadblocks to? Who knows? Because I think the large task forces again was a blessing and a curse, as they say.
But Susan, I wanted
Sorry.
to ask you about that. You purposely, you picked the chairs, obviously, but you made it an open call
Yes.
for all 3 of your task forces.
Yes.
So one of the things that we all know that happens with an organization like STP, or I'm going to say the leadership of PsyChi, or the leadership of a regional like EPA, Eastern Psychological, or Rocky Mountain Psychological, they all get accused of being insular or cliquish in the leadership ranks. And the answer is they are, because a small number of people do a lot of the work. And the beautiful thing about the task force system is the way that Susan executed it is that other people get a chance to break in. They get a chance to see leadership. They get a chance to have a voice and be in this case, a co-author on a manuscript that's not only going to get them a publication, but it's going to get it read by people in leadership positions. And the executive committee of the Society for Teaching of Psychology, it's going to get noticed. It's going to get published on the STP website in perpetuity. And so even though these organizations, not by design, but just by function, tend to be cliquish and insular, there are ways to overcome it. And this task force open call is a lovely way to do that.
And most presidents now do that. I think almost all do the open calls. This is how I broke in. And also when I looked at the rosters of the 3 task forces, I knew fewer than half of the people who signed up. So that was
Right.
wonderful.
That's lovely.
And we had a lot of diversity in a lot of ways. Yeah. So Yinka, did you have any comments or questions for Chris and Jenel before I asked them to?
Yeah, I have to say, I've just been listening because I had not known about this. This is all new to me. And this is one of the wonderful things about having this podcast is that new information is shared and learned. And hopefully our listeners are grabbing a hold of this. And I am really looking forward to seeing this paper when it comes out. So thank you so much for sharing and for the work that you've done with this.
No,
And by the way, I can't believe how you hold your face so still while you talk. It's unbelievable, that skill that you have.
our listeners, Yinka's video is I think
Frozen.
I should
Is
just
it
also
frozen?
add
Oh,
that
am
anyone
I frozen?
anyone who's interested in an STP Presidential Task Force, and every fall, look at teachpsych.org, get involved. Usually somewhere around October to December will be the calls for the task forces. And Jenel and Chris, would you each like to end with some observation or comment or anything you want?
Oh, we're not done with them, are we? We're not sending them off.
I thought there was something about special Fulbright, something.
That's not relevant.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Are we going to talk
Okay,
about task
Eric?
forces that went wrong?
No, we talked about the pros and cons.
Oh, okay. I won't tell that story then. Sorry. Never
Oh,
mind.
do you have a task force that went wrong? Because Eric was a former president of STP and I had his task forces as well.
My task forces went fine. I had 3 task forces. Dana Dunn, by the way, overachiever that he has, had 8 task forces. You know, what an obnoxious friend.
So Dana.
It's so Dana. Thank you.
Dana.
Thank you, Chris. That's so Dana. I'm trying to think, will the person who I'm about to talk about ever listen to this podcast? Probably not. Let's just say that I served as a co-chair of a task force that did not go well. So they don't always go well. They're not always as efficient as what I'm hearing from Jenel, members of her task force. So, like any other faculty committee, sometimes they go swimmingly and sometimes they go sinkingly.
I knew of a task
I
force as
was
well from a long time ago that the chair was one of the people that didn't end up doing the work. And I was not on it. I just know about it. And it died. Nothing happened. So you're right.
Yeah, I was on a task force exactly like that under Sue Franz when she was, and that was actually the first one I'd ever done. But I was so excited to have gotten selected to be on the task force, and I was really excited about the mission. And then we didn't end up doing anything at all. So yeah, so they definitely can go badly.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and
one
I
of
was
the things I should add too, and when you mentioned Sue, the task forces go off and do their work. Presidents check in with them.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
these are autonomous groups. So it really does depend on who's on the task force as opposed to who is the president. The president decides that they are, but the task forces then go away and do their work independently.
I was on a task force probably 5 or 6 years ago. We did all of our work. We did a really good job. It was a wonderful group of people to work with. And we sent our report to the president, and it stopped there because it wasn't something that STP decided to pursue at that time. But it was a great experience, and I got to meet some really interesting people. And we put together, I thought, a really, really good report. So I think that these things they can be incredibly valuable, and they can build connections among colleagues in ways that are really terrific. So.
Yeah, the three presidential task forces that I had, all three of them generated reports that are not currently on the STP website. And I not only talked about the results of them, but also acknowledged those members in my presidential address when I gave it in August. Back in the olden days when there wasn't an ACT, so to speak. And so you went to the APA convention in a big city and you gave it in person back in the before times. So yeah.
And then we're going to be actually talking to the leaders of the other two of my presidential task forces in coming episodes. So we'll get to hear what they did as well.
Pivot teaching, statistical task force, right?
Statistical reasoning,
Reasoning?
and literacy, and the third one was
DEI.
DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion, and internationalization. And they wrote a color paper that's on the STP's website, and the stats groups, there was one more focused. They broke into two groups. One was more focused on intro to psych, which should be learned there, and the other one was more focused on the major, and they developed a whole bunch of resources. So good stuff. And I just want to thank our our guests today, Jenel Cavazos and Chris Hefla. Thank you for joining us.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.